All right, so this is going to be kind of a mashup of parapsychology and philosophy ideas. So I'm going to basically start out with some abstract concepts, and then I'm going to work my way into some very preliminary results. So these are what I call the three essential mysteries of consciousness, and what I mean by that is these are... So on the left here I have the philosophical challenges, the hard problem, and the selection problem. And then I sort of put psi phenomena as like that's not as abstract and philosophical, but I call that one of the hardest problems of consciousness. That's not directly philosophy related, because that is potentially the most paradigm shifting. So maybe I'm not being totally fair to some of the harder neuroscience, but this is the way I see it, and basically I'm going to talk more in depth about the selection problem in particular, because I put that idea out a few years ago, and it's not currently widely accepted, so I'm going to try to make a case for that, and also talk about how can we bridge the gap between psi and some of these harder philosophical questions. So to put it in some context, the idea here is that, we're taking existing problems, existing literature, and coalescing it into a framework at which we can attack it. So that's kind of what the hard problem does. It's nothing new per se, but it's asking the question of consciousness in a direct matter. How does a physical system become conscious? From the building blocks of the universe, how do you theoretically build a physical system that for it to be like something to be that system? The selection problem is basically a complement to that. I ask, once the physical system is conscious, how does that become a particular subject of experience? And so this is loosely tied into what I've been hearing some more of at this conference about the combination problem, which how does microqualia combine into macroqualia with a single subject of experience? But that really only emerges in panpsychism, and I see the selection problem as encapsulating that and more problems about the nature of the self that asks it in a more direct way. So the way I see it is, if we answer the selection problem, that basically answers most of our questions about the nature of the self and all of the weird things about it. So to be more specific, the framework I put this in is, there's all these questions of what makes you, you. If you were to upload your consciousness into an alternate substrate, such as a computer, would it still be you? Which is really an extension of the Swamp Man thought experiment. You have a lightning bolt that kills a person and another bolt that rearranges them in the same exact way in another location. And if you think about it, it's really hard to come up with an answer of would it be you or not, because they both seem like good answers. If you preserve the original body, well, what's the physical difference? But then you can't be in both places at once. But if you're the same physical system in every meaningful way, why wouldn't it be you? So I basically redefine all of that. The combination problem, Swamp Man, uploading questions, all these mysteries of the self. And I frame it as, imagine that in thought experiment world, that there's an infinite amount of conscious organisms being born, or coming into an existence. I think what that simple thought experiment shows is that there is an infinite amount of potential subjects of experiences, or selves, if you want to think of it. An infinite amount of potential selves. So, what physical process forced a particular physical conscious system to select your subject of experience out of the infinite amount of options that it had? And so, this is, I started talking about this in 2012, I think, and since then I've gotten a number of main critiques, and I have a way that I respond to each of these. So, presupposing subjects of experience, that's in and of itself is a controversial point. Especially when we talk about psychedelic research, there's all this about the idea of selfless experience. There can be possibly experience without a self, without an actual subject experiencing it. The way I see it is, I'm not denying that per se, and nor am I saying it can't be an illusion in some sense, but it still has consequences for us. So for example, when my body dies, if myself, as I'm experiencing it, is an illusion, well, I want the illusion of it to continue. So in some way, it does matter. People say this is a dualistic perspective. This is just dualism. No, it's not, because when I'm saying infinite amount of potential selves, a potential self, sure, you could think of it as a soul, but it doesn't have to be. It's not some spooky thing. It's really just a construct. Like potential energy is not some real physical thing but it just helps us solve problems. So that's the way I think of it. And another point of view is, well, this problem doesn't arise in the third-person perspective. But so the way I attack that is by saying that, well, for you, it's still consequential. Like, whether your body or whether you came into an existence or not is extremely consequential, and so it still has some objective further fact in that sense. And lastly, like, why postulate an infinite amount of these subjects? Well, because again, that just makes the most sense in terms of thinking there really are an infinite amount of possible subjects at any time that could exist or not exist. And that just helps us think about it in terms of existential questions about death, if there's reincarnation and stuff like that. Basically, this is the most direct way to attack the mystery of the self, in my view, is to frame it in this manner. So this is just a little web thing that I sketched out of how I think all of these different ideas could be connected to true randomness in a way. So I talked about it with the selection problem. I'm going to use my laser pointer now. So I talked about it in that way, but also I want to clarify, I think the way I see it, some of these, such as, the hard problem, there's talk about it being equivalent to a wave function collapse, just as one example. And also psi phenomena, one way to think of it might be a direct influence or a prediction of a random event. And there's a lot of work going on with that and connecting that to quantum phenomena. Now, the loop I'm going to throw in here is that turbulence is also something that looks to us, it behaves sort of truly random. It's, at least from our standpoint, an unsolved problem in physics. But there's also some evidence coming out, I don't have time to get into it, but that it might actually be a quantum phenomena at heart. So, do I know that these are all connected? No, but this is a framework, and I think this is some of the best ground we have at this time to attack this problem. And so these are just what I call the visible pathways. So this is the link a lot of parapsychologists have been looking at recently. For example, double slit experiment with meditators. All of that is great work. What I argue is this pathway is actually potentially would be more useful to shed light on this entire web of phenomena here. The reason why I'm arguing that is because turbulence in its essence, so we think of it as just something you experience on an airplane, but you really see it everywhere. A gust of wind is turbulence. You see it at the base of a waterfall. If you have gone in the hot tub at this resort, you will experience turbulent flow coming out of the jets. So it's really any chaotic movement of a fluid. And remember, air is a fluid, so that's why it exists in the atmosphere. So it's nonlinear, so a small change to the initial state of the fluid causes a larger change at a later state in time. That's classic chaos theory, butterfly effect stuff. And the significance of that is I think that might result in consistently larger effect sizes for mind over matter experiments, because if the mind can influence really just a tiny thing, then that might, through these chaos amplification, that might amplify into a larger effect. And if we can get consistently larger effect sizes, then we can understand the phenomena better. So this is just looking at some experiments that very preliminary work. So this part here is not directly tied to consciousness just yet, but this is more looking at the quantum randomness and turbulence part. This is basically, so my primary field is in atmospheric science, and I've been funded to do these flights primarily to study ozone in 2016 in the San Joaquin Valley, and then in Las Vegas the following year. And so this is more just a matter of, well, I'm desperate to do something consciousness research related, so why not bring a random number generator on the aircraft? So these are just the areas we're flying, just to show you it's where we're going. This is how I defined randomness in my case with a single random number generator, basically absolute value between difference between the sum of ones and the expected value. It's a simple way of doing it. There's other ways, but this is just what I chose for this purpose. Just a little more background on this. So in this specific hypothesis I have, unstable air, you get turbulence, cumulus clouds. This is more conductive to turbulence when you have unstable air, and smooth, stable air is less conductive to turbulence. So just keep that in mind, and one way to measure it is the change in temperature with height in the atmosphere. So just think of that as temperature. And what I'm hypothesizing is that if there's some connection between the actual randomness of what I'm generating and flying through turbulence, then there'll be increased synchronicity in the random number generator in unstable conditions. So the results were pretty significant, especially mainly for the San Joaquin Valley series of flights. And this is just a cumulative result by flight of both of them put together. So you can see at the end we get a fairly robust result. So granted, this is extremely non-specific, and so I've not been able to rule out it being an artifact just yet. I'll state that clearly. It could also be an experimenter effect. My intention, my wish for it to be behaving in this way, although that would have to be a pretty big experimenter effect because of all the hours we were flying, and also me not being aware consciously of when is exactly unstable versus stable conditions. But one possible way to view it is maybe it is a connection between quantum randomness and turbulence, and could this be one piece of the puzzle that'll tie us into physical theories of consciousness? I don't know just yet. It's, I don't know exactly where this piece of the puzzle is going to fit in, but I wanted to present it because of the statistical result on this. So more directly addressing the turbulence aspect, so that's quantum to turbulence or randomness to turbulence. This is turbulence and quantum a little more directly. This is just showing it's hard to measure turbulence, and we use a sonic anemometer for it, which takes high-frequency measurements. So participants were recruited from various blogs and social media pages. They went online to this site and filled out a questionnaire. This experiment is not currently active. They had to take the sonic anemometer down, and I'm working on getting it up at another site, but I'm working through some red tape at the moment. But eventually, this will be available for you all to participate in. So this is a traditional 10-minute session, 19 epochs, with intend and relax epochs. And they're asked to try to increase the turbulence during the intention epochs. And so the hypothesis is that will increase during the intention epochs. This is the way we measure turbulence, just a very simple sum of the variances of all three spatial components. And another hypothesis here is that performance will be improved with more stability. And this is the way we measure stability. I'll be happy to spend an hour explaining this after the talk if anyone would like that. This just illustrates the noise. So it's a little counterintuitive. Why am I saying I'd expect a bigger effect if it's more stable? Well, because once you exceed a certain threshold, just think of this axis as stability, think of this as turbulence. Once you exceed a certain threshold, it's all over the place. There's almost no relationship. And so if you're going from a background of almost no turbulence it's almost easier in a way to go from that to something, and that difference is bigger than somewhere where you already have turbulence in unstable conditions, and you're just basically creating more. So because this was unfunded and not well advertised, I didn't have a lot of recruiting resources, so whatever you can make with 8 data points, do what you will with it. But I'm hoping to get more participants. It is in the predicted direction for what it's worth. But this was a little more interesting. This was that other hypothesis I talked about. It does, again, this is the predicted relationship with stability that I was talking about. But yeah, it needs to be explored more. So these are my conclusions. The selection problem complements the hard problem. These all seem to be related to true randomness. Possibly, I don't know that they are, but I think this is the strongest framework we have at the time to address these questions, and the preliminary results encourage this approach to continue. I'll leave some acknowledgments on the board, and I will take any questions.
Lever, time for 1 minute of questions. 1 minute of questions.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Ed May, researcher in remote viewing psi effects? His hypothesis that chaotic or high entropy targets are more easily perceived extrasensorially on remote viewing?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Danny. Back in 2015 at Helsinki, there was someone who presented something where, in some cases, classical systems like the turbulence effect seem to be even more subject to telekinesis than quantum systems. So this is very interesting from that point of view. And the second thing, at the very, very end, where you're showing, that all over the map, there has Henry Stab, I think it was, in one of his books, was talking about how fast, when you roll the dice, they go into quantum superposition. So I mean, it's much faster than you think. Even though you think of it as a classical system. Anyway, if you want to.
Yeah, no, I'll look into that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.